I stood at my daughter's wedding, holding a microphone, when she looked me in the eye and told an entire room full of people that I was nothing to her. Not her mother, not her family, just a stranger who had no right to be there. In that moment, 30 years of silence, lies, and unanswered love collapsed into a single truth I could no longer keep hidden. And what I did next didn't just shock the guests, it changed everything I thought I had lost forever. Before we step into today's story, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're joining us from. We're always amazed by how these stories connect people across different cultures and places. Your voice in the comments keeps this community alive, so don't hold back. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll always be the first to catch our latest tales. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready for a journey that might just change the way you see things. Let's dive in. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 72 years old, and I live alone in a weathered wooden house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean in Charleston, South Carolina. The house creaks when the wind comes in from the water, and sometimes, in the early mornings, it feels like the walls themselves are remembering things I have tried so hard to forget. My days follow a quiet, predictable rhythm. I wake before sunrise, make a cup of tea, and sit by the window where the light slowly fills the room. I read old novels, the kind that speak more about loss than happiness, and in the afternoons, I tend to my rose garden. The roses are the only things in my life that still feel alive with purpose. I have grown them for more than 20 years, carefully pruning each branch, nurturing each bloom as if it carried a memory. In a way, they do. My daughter Emily loved roses when she was little. She used to run through the yard, pointing at each flower, asking their names, as if they were people she needed to remember. That was a long time ago, a lifetime ago. Now the house is silent. It has been for years. I have no husband, no children nearby, and very few people who know anything about my past. Most of my neighbors see me as a quiet widow who keeps to herself. They do not know that I was once part of something larger, something full of noise and movement and meaning. There was a time when this life was not empty. I was married to a man named Richard Hale. He was successful, influential, and respected in ways that opened doors I did not even know existed. We had a daughter together, Emily, and for a few years, I believed we were building something strong and lasting. But marriages do not always break loudly. Sometimes they collapse quietly, under the weight of things that are never said out loud. When our marriage ended, it did not end evenly. Richard had resources, connections, and a legal team that knew exactly how to reshape the truth. I had none of those things. In court, I was not presented as a mother who loved her child. I was portrayed as unstable, unreliable, a woman who could not provide the kind of life Emily deserved. The judgment came down quickly, and with it, my role in my daughter's life was reduced to almost nothing. I tried to stay present anyway. I wrote letters, dozens of them, each one carefully worded, each one carrying pieces of my heart. I sent gifts on birthdays and holidays, small things that I hoped would remind her that I was still there. I even sent money to support her education, though I never knew if she received any of it. I tried to visit, to arrange meetings, but every attempt seemed to disappear before it reached her. Over time, the silence became its own answer, or at least, that is what I told myself. I did not know if Emily had chosen to turn away from me, or if she had never been given the chance to choose at all. That uncertainty settled into me, quiet and persistent, like a shadow that never quite leaves. Years passed. I grew older. The world moved forward without me, and I learned how to exist within the narrow space that remained. But no matter how much time passed, no matter how quiet my life became, there was one thing I could never fully do. I never stopped being her mother. If you're still watching and already feel the weight of everything she lost, comment number 1 below to let me know you're here with me. Now, let's move on to the moment that changed everything. The morning began like any other, quiet and predictable, wrapped in the soft gray light that filtered through the lace curtains of my kitchen window. I stood at the counter, waiting for the kettle to whistle, watching the ocean in the distance as if it might offer something new, though it never did. Routine had become my anchor over the years, a way to move through time without thinking too much about what had been lost. I poured my tea, carried it to the small wooden table, and sat down with a book I had already read twice before. It was only when I stepped outside to check the mailbox that something shifted. Among the usual stack of advertisements and bills was an envelope that did not belong. It was heavier, thicker, made of cream-colored paper that felt expensive even before I touched it. My name was written in elegant handwriting, the kind that took time and care. There was no return address. For a moment, I simply stood there, holding it, feeling a strange tightness in my chest that I could not immediately explain. I carried it inside, but did not open it right away. Instead, I placed it on the table beside my untouched tea and sat down, staring at it as if it might reveal its purpose on its own. Something about it unsettled me. Not fear exactly, but a quiet sense that whatever was inside would not leave my life unchanged. When I finally reached for the letter opener, my hands were not as steady as I would have liked. The paper slid open with a soft sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the stillness of the room. Inside was a wedding invitation. Emily Whitmore and Daniel Brooks. For a few seconds, I could not fully understand what I was looking at. The words seemed to blur together, as if my mind refused to accept them. 30 years of silence, of unanswered letters and vanished gifts, and now this. My daughter was getting married. I lowered myself into the chair slowly, the card still in my hands. The details were elegant, precise, everything about it suggesting a carefully planned, high society event at a coastal resort not far from where I lived. It was the kind of wedding I might have imagined for her once, back when I still believed I would be there, standing beside her, helping her prepare for the day. Then I noticed the small line written at the bottom. It would be appropriate if you attended. I read it more than once, hoping the words might change. They did not. There was no warmth in them, no recognition, no trace of the relationship that had once defined my entire world. It was not an invitation from a daughter to her mother. It was a formality, a gesture shaped by expectation rather than feeling. I set the card down and looked out toward the garden. The roses were beginning to bloom, their pale petals opening slowly in the morning light. For a moment, I let myself remember Emily as she had been, a small child running through those same flowers, her laughter carrying through the air. The memory was sharp enough to hurt. I knew what logic demanded. I should not go. I should protect what little dignity I had left and remain where I belonged, in the quiet life I had built from what remained. But logic had never been stronger than hope, and hope, even after all these years, had not completely disappeared. This might be the only chance I would ever have. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the decision settle into me. Time was no longer something I had in abundance. Regret, on the other hand, had been with me for decades. When I opened my eyes again, the answer was already there. No matter how I was received, no matter how cold the room might feel, I would go. If that invitation gave you the same uneasy feeling it gave her, comment number 2 below so I know you're paying attention. Now, let's step into the wedding day. The day of the wedding arrived with a bright, unforgiving clarity, the kind of southern sunlight that left no shadows to hide in. I left my house earlier than necessary, not because I feared being late, but because I needed time to steady myself before stepping into a world I had not belonged to for more than 3 decades. The drive along the coast was familiar, yet everything felt different, as if the air itself carried a quiet tension I could not escape. The resort came into view like something out of a magazine, white walls gleaming against the blue horizon, perfectly trimmed lawns stretching toward the ocean. Guests moved in clusters, dressed in soft pastels and tailored suits, their laughter carried by the breeze. I parked at the far end of the lot and sat for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, reminding myself why I had come. When I finally stepped out, I felt both invisible and exposed at the same time. No one paid attention to me, yet I was acutely aware of every step I took. I walked toward the entrance, holding my invitation like proof that I had a right to be there. At the reception table, a young woman in a pressed uniform greeted me with a polite smile that faltered slightly as she checked the list. Her eyes moved down the page once, then again, slower this time. I watched the shift in her expression, subtle but unmistakable. She glanced at me, then back at the list, as if trying to reconcile something that did not quite fit. After a brief pause, she nodded and handed me a place card, but the hesitation lingered. I did not need to ask what she had seen, or rather, what she had not seen. Inside, the seating arrangement made everything clear. The front tables, closest to the aisle and the floral arch, were reserved for family. Names were displayed neatly, each one placed with intention. I searched for mine out of habit, though I already knew the answer. It was not there. Instead, I found my name at a table near the back, surrounded by strangers who spoke easily among themselves, unaware of who I was or why I might matter. I took my seat without comment, folding my hands in my lap as if stillness could protect me from what I was beginning to understand. This was not an oversight. It was a decision. When the music began, all conversation softened into anticipation. I turned my attention toward the aisle just as Emily appeared. For a moment, everything else faded. She was radiant, composed in a way that suggested years of confidence I had never witnessed. There was something familiar in her posture, something unmistakably mine, and yet she felt like a stranger. Her eyes moved across the guests, scanning faces, acknowledging smiles. When her gaze passed over me, it did not pause. There was no flicker of recognition, no hesitation. It was as if I were part of the background, another indistinct shape in a room full of people. The realization settled slowly, like a weight pressing down on my chest. 30 years of absence had not only created distance, it had erased me. Richard stood at the end of the aisle, waiting for her with the ease of a man who had never doubted his place. When she reached him, he took her arm, and together they moved forward, framed by admiration and approval. No one questioned it. No one hesitated. I sat very still, watching a life unfold in which I no longer existed. And yet, despite everything, I did not leave. If you felt that moment when she realized she had been erased, comment number 3 below to stay with me. Now, let's see what she tries to do next. The ceremony ended in a wash of applause and soft music, and the guests began to drift toward the reception area as if guided by an invisible current. Conversations rose quickly, laughter returned, and glasses of champagne appeared in nearly every hand. The atmosphere shifted from solemn to celebratory in a matter of minutes. It should have felt warm, inviting even. Instead, I felt like I was standing just outside of it, close enough to observe but never truly included. I remained seated for a few moments longer than necessary, watching as Emily moved through the crowd. People gathered around her effortlessly, drawn by her presence, her confidence, the ease with which she accepted their attention. She smiled, nodded, leaned in when others spoke, every gesture polished and natural. I tried to find traces of the child I once knew in her expressions, but the years had built something new, something I had not been there to witness. Richard stayed close to her, never intruding, yet always present. He greeted guests with quiet authority, guiding conversations, positioning himself exactly where he needed to be. There was something deliberate in the way he moved, as if the entire event followed a pattern he understood better than anyone else. I told myself that if I waited too long, I would lose the chance entirely. Gathering what composure I could, I stood and made my way across the room. Each step felt measured, careful, as though the floor beneath me might shift if I moved too quickly. When I reached her, she turned toward me with the same polite expression she had given everyone else. For a brief moment, we stood facing each other, close enough that I could see the fine details of her face, the familiar shape of her eyes, the slight tension in her posture. "I wanted to congratulate you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You look beautiful today." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the words without absorbing them. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I appreciate you coming." The name settled between us like a quiet barrier, not harsh, not unkind, but distant in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. I handed her the small box I had brought, wrapped carefully the night before. It contained a brooch shaped like a rose, something I had chosen with more thought than I cared to admit. She accepted it without hesitation, her fingers brushing the edge of the box, but never touching mine. "I hope you like it," I added. "I am sure I will," she replied, already glancing past me as if the conversation had reached its natural end. I tried once more, searching for something that might hold her attention for even a moment longer, but the space between us did not allow it. A group of guests approached, and she shifted her focus toward them with visible relief. I stepped back, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. As I turned away, I became aware of a quiet exchange behind one of the service tables. A staff member spoke in hushed tones to another, glancing briefly in my direction. I caught only fragments, but it was enough. My name had been moved, not removed entirely, but repositioned from family to guest. The instruction had come from the father's side. The confirmation did not shock me as much as I expected. Instead, it settled into place, aligning with everything I had already begun to suspect. This was not distance born from time alone. It had been shaped, adjusted, maintained with intention. I returned to my seat, folding my hands once more, but this time the stillness felt different. The uncertainty had faded, replaced by something clearer, sharper. This was no longer about being ignored. It was about being erased. If you're starting to see that this wasn't an accident but something much deeper, comment number 4 below to let me know you're still here. Now everything is about to escalate. By the time the reception reached its full rhythm, the room had transformed into something bright and effortless. Music carried easily across the space, glasses clinked in soft celebration, and conversations layered over one another in a steady hum of contentment. From a distance, it looked like the kind of evening people remembered fondly for years. From where I sat, it felt like watching a story that had been carefully edited to exclude me entirely. One by one, the speeches began. Friends of the couple stepped forward first, sharing stories that drew laughter and easy applause. Colleagues followed, speaking about Emily's intelligence, her discipline, the way she had built her career with precision and strength. Members of Daniel's family spoke warmly, welcoming her into their circle as if she had always belonged there. Each voice added another layer to the version of her life that existed in this room. There was no space in any of it for me. I listened as long as I could, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my posture still and composed. Outwardly, I was calm. Inwardly, something had begun to shift. It was not sudden, not explosive, but steady and undeniable, like a tide turning beneath the surface. When the announcer invited anyone else to share a few words, a quiet pause settled over the room. It was the kind of pause that usually passed quickly, filled by someone eager to speak. But this time, no one moved. I felt the weight of the moment before I fully understood what I was about to do. For years, I had chosen silence. I had told myself it was the dignified thing to do, the respectful thing, the way to protect whatever fragile possibility remained between me and my daughter. But as I sat there, surrounded by a version of her life that did not include me, I understood something I had avoided for far too long. Silence had not protected anything. It had erased me. I stood before I could reconsider. The movement felt slow, deliberate, as if every part of me needed to agree before it could happen. A few heads turned, then more. I could feel their attention gathering, quiet but focused. The walk to the microphone seemed longer than it should have been. Each step carried the weight of years I could not reclaim. I was aware of Richard before I reached the front. He had gone still, his attention fixed on me with a sharpness that had not been there before. He understood what was happening, even if no one else did. I took the microphone and turned toward the room. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," I began, my voice steady despite the pressure building inside my chest. I did not get any further. Emily stood up abruptly, the movement cutting through the room more sharply than any raised voice could have. Every conversation stopped. Every glance shifted. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said, her tone clear, controlled, and unmistakably firm. "This woman is not part of our family." The words landed with a finality that left no space for interpretation. A ripple moved through the guests, not loud, but present. Confusion, discomfort, curiosity. No one spoke, but no one looked away either. Emily continued, her gaze fixed forward, not on me. "She left when I was a child. She chose not to be in my life. I do not know why she is speaking now." I stood there, the microphone still in my hand, the room suspended in a silence that felt heavier than any noise. For a moment, I felt the full weight of what had just happened, not as a sudden blow, but as the confirmation of something that had been building for years. This was the story she believed. This was the version of me that had replaced the truth. I could leave. The thought came quickly, almost instinctively. I could set the microphone down, walk out, and allow this moment to settle into the same silence that had defined the rest of my life. No one would stop me. No one would question it. But I knew what that would mean. It would mean the end. I remained where I was, the silence stretching, the decision forming with a clarity I had not felt in years. This was the moment I had been avoiding. And now, it was the only one that mattered. The silence that followed Emily's words did not break. It deepened, settling over the room like something heavy and immovable. I could feel every eye on me, not with hostility, but with a kind of suspended judgment, as if the entire space was waiting to see what I would do next. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel it fully. The weight of years reduced to a single sentence, the quiet certainty with which my daughter had erased me in front of everyone who mattered to her. It hurt, but not in the way I had once imagined. The pain was steadier now, less sharp, shaped by time and endurance. I had lived with versions of this moment for decades, only in smaller, quieter forms. This was simply the first time it had been spoken out loud. I understood what leaving would mean. I could step away, preserve what little dignity I had left, and disappear once more into the life I had built in silence. No one would question it. The story would remain intact, unchallenged, and complete. But I also understood something else, something I had avoided for far too long. If I left now, I would be choosing that story for myself. I adjusted my grip on the microphone, not to steady my hands, but to anchor my decision. When I spoke, my voice carried more clearly than I expected, not raised, not strained, but firm in a way that surprised even me. I understand why you believe that, I said, my eyes resting briefly on Emily before returning to the room as a whole. There was a shift then, subtle but unmistakable. Not agreement, not yet, but a tension that leaned forward rather than away. I did not rush. There was no need. The truth had waited this long. I spoke of the divorce, not in bitterness, but in facts. Of the courtroom where decisions had been made quickly and decisively, guided by resources I did not have. Of the custody I had lost, not by choice, but by a system that favored power over presence. I spoke of the attempts that followed, the letters written carefully and sent with hope, the visits arranged and quietly denied, the gifts that never found their way into my daughter's hands. I did not look at Richard as I spoke. I did not need to. His presence had already shaped everything that had been said. From my bag, I took out the small cassette I had carried with me, the plastic worn slightly with age. I held it for a moment, aware of how much it contained, not just in sound, but in consequence. I explained briefly what it was, how it had come into my possession, and why I had kept it all these years. When the recording began, the room seemed to contract around the sound. His voice, unmistakable, steady, and certain, filled the silence he had once controlled. There was no anger in it, no hesitation, only intention laid bare in a way that required no interpretation. I did not watch him. I watched Emily. The change was gradual but visible. Confusion gave way to something deeper, something less certain. The version of the past she had carried for so long no longer aligned cleanly with what she was hearing. When the recording ended, I did not add to it. There was nothing left that needed emphasis. I never stopped being your mother, I said quietly, not as a defense, but as a truth that did not require permission. I set the microphone back into its stand and stepped away. I had not come to win anything, and I was not staying to argue. Whatever happened next would not be decided in this room. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet, but release. If that truth hit you as hard as it hit that room, comment number 6 below so I know you're still with me. Now let's move on to chapter 7 and see what happens after everything falls apart. The moment I stepped away from the microphone, the room did not recover. It remained suspended in a silence that felt heavier than anything that had come before it. The music had stopped at some point, though I did not remember when. Conversations had not resumed. People stood in place, as if unsure whether they were still part of a celebration or something else entirely. I did not look back at the stage. Instead, I focused on something smaller, simpler, the act of walking. One step, then another. My hands felt steady, though I could sense the fatigue settling into my body now that the moment had passed. It was not the kind of exhaustion that came from physical effort, but something deeper, as if years of restraint had finally loosened all at once. Around me, the guests began to shift, their stillness breaking into quiet murmurs. I caught fragments of expression rather than words, raised eyebrows, uncertain glances, the subtle tilt of heads as people tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. No one approached me. A few looked as though they might, but something held them back. Perhaps it was uncertainty. Perhaps it was respect. I allowed that distance to remain. As I reached my table, I paused only long enough to collect my bag and the light shawl I had set over the chair. The place setting in front of me was untouched, the glass still full, the napkin folded exactly as it had been when I arrived. It felt like a small, quiet reflection of the role I had played here, present, but never included. I became aware of movement near the front of the room, not by turning, but by the shift in attention that moved through the guests like a ripple. I did not need to see Richard to understand that he was trying to regain control, to reassemble the structure that had just been disrupted. That had always been his strength: order, presentation, narrative. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way the room held itself, in the hesitation that lingered where certainty had once been. I moved toward the exit without urgency, but without hesitation either. Each step felt clearer than the last, as though I were leaving behind not just a place, but a version of myself that had remained silent for too long. No one stopped me. At the doorway, I paused briefly, not to reconsider, but to take in the final impression of the room. It was no longer the bright, effortless celebration I had walked into hours earlier. It was something quieter now, unsettled, as if the truth had altered its shape in ways no one had anticipated. Then I stepped outside. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and distant water. The sounds from inside the hall faded quickly once the door closed behind me, replaced by the steady rhythm of the ocean in the distance. I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle around me. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know how Emily would process what she had heard, or whether anything I had said would reach her in the way I hoped. But for the first time in many years, I no longer felt trapped inside a story I had not chosen. I had spoken, and whatever came next would no longer be built on silence. The morning after the wedding felt unnaturally quiet, as if the world had paused to catch its breath. I moved through my house slowly, aware of every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the ocean beyond the windows. My routine was there, waiting for me, but it no longer fit the same way. Something had shifted, and I could not return to the version of stillness that had defined my days before. I replayed the night in fragments rather than as a whole. The silence, Emily's voice, the weight of the room as the truth unfolded. There were moments I questioned, wondering if I had chosen the wrong time, the wrong place, the wrong way to speak. A wedding was meant to mark a beginning, not expose the fractures beneath it. But each time doubt surfaced, it met the same realization. There had never been a right time, only the time I had finally taken. By the second day, the uncertainty settled into something quieter. Not resolution, but acceptance. Whatever consequences followed would come in their own way. I had done what I could. When the knock came at the door, it startled me more than I expected. I opened it to find Emily standing there. She looked different without the careful structure of the wedding around her. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her expression unguarded in a way that made her seem younger, though the exhaustion in her eyes told a different story. For a moment, neither of us moved. The distance between us felt smaller than it had the day before, but no less complicated. I stepped aside, allowing her in without words. She walked slowly through the house, her gaze moving across the room, pausing on the shelves, the framed photographs, the quiet details of a life she had never seen. I watched her take it in, not with curiosity alone, but with something heavier, as if she were trying to reconcile this space with the absence she had always known. I brought out the things I had kept for years, not dramatically, but carefully, placing them on the table between us. The letters came first, their envelopes still sealed, edges worn from time but untouched otherwise. Then the records of the transfers, the confirmations that had once been sent with hope. Finally, the photographs, small pieces of her life gathered from a distance, moments I had never been part of but had refused to let go. She sat down and began to look through them. I did not speak. There was nothing I could say that would carry the same weight as what she was seeing. Her movement slowed as she turned each page, each letter, as if time itself had shifted around her. After a while, she reached into her bag and placed something of her own on the table. A small stack of envelopes, older than they should have been, their surfaces marked by dust and storage. They were unopened. I understood before she needed to explain. She had found them hidden away, kept but never delivered. Along with them, she had uncovered something else, documents that carried her name but not her consent, signatures that looked like hers but were not written by her hand. The realization had not come all at once, but piece by piece, until it could no longer be ignored. The room held a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of absence, but of something being rebuilt, slowly and carefully, from the remains of what had been taken. When she finally looked up, there was no certainty in her expression, only the beginning of understanding. It was not forgiveness, but it was no longer rejection. If you feel that shift and realize nothing will ever be the same again, comment number 8 below to stay with me. Now, let's move toward the final outcome of this story. The weeks that followed our meeting passed more slowly than I expected. Each morning returned me to the same quiet routine, yet something within it had shifted. I no longer moved through the days with the same resignation. There was a space now where something uncertain but undeniable had begun to take form. I did not know what it would become, and I resisted the urge to define it too quickly. Emily did not call right away. I told myself that this was natural, that she needed time to process what she had uncovered, to reconcile the life she had known with the truths that had only recently surfaced. Still, the absence of contact reopened a familiar tension, one I had lived with for years. I did not reach out. Whatever came next had to come from her. When the knock came again, it carried a different weight. I opened the door to find Emily standing there, and beside her was Daniel. His presence was calm, steady, not intrusive. It was a deliberate choice, I realized. She had not come back alone this time. She had brought part of her new life with her. I stepped aside, welcoming them in. The house felt smaller with more than one person inside, as if it had to adjust to being lived in again. Emily moved through the space with less hesitation than before. Her gaze still lingered on the details, but there was less distance in the way she observed them. Daniel remained attentive without imposing, his quiet presence grounding the moment in a way that felt unexpectedly reassuring. We sat together in the living room, the same place where I had once laid out the letters and photographs. This time, the table remained clear. There was no need for proof. That part had already been done. Conversation came slowly at first, beginning with the present. Safe topics, measured exchanges, the kind that allowed space without forcing closeness. I spoke about my days, my garden, the books I returned to when I needed something familiar. Emily listened, not politely, but with a focus that suggested she was trying to understand rather than simply respond. At some point, the conversation shifted without announcement. The past entered quietly, not as an argument, but as something we were both beginning to examine from the same side. I chose my words carefully, offering pieces rather than the whole. There was no need to overwhelm her. What mattered was not how much I could explain, but how much she was ready to receive. When Emily stepped outside for a moment, her attention drawn toward the garden, I followed at a distance. She paused near the rose bushes, her gaze settling on the blooms that had just begun to open. For a brief second, something changed in her expression, something softer, less guarded. There was recognition there, faint but present. She did not say anything, and neither did I. The moment did not need to be named to exist. When we returned inside, the distance between us had shifted again, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. As they prepared to leave, Emily paused near the door, her posture uncertain, but no longer closed. There was no declaration, no sudden resolution, only a quiet acknowledgement that something had begun. I understood then that this was not an ending. It was the first real beginning we had ever been given. In the days that followed Emily's visit, the house no longer felt as still as it once had. Nothing had changed in a way that could be seen from the outside. The furniture remained where it had always been, the books still lined the shelves, and the ocean continued its quiet rhythm beyond the windows. Yet something within the space had shifted, as if the air itself carried a different weight. I found myself returning to the garden more often. The roses had reached full bloom, their petals open wide, delicate yet resilient against the coastal wind. I moved among them slowly, trimming where needed, adjusting the soil, giving attention to each plant in a way that felt both familiar and newly meaningful. For years, I had cared for them as a way to hold on to something that had been lost. Now, for the first time, it felt as though they were part of something that might still grow. I thought often about the night of the wedding, not with regret, but with a kind of quiet examination. It had not been the right setting for truth, not by any conventional standard. It had disrupted something meant to be joyful, exposed what others might have preferred to remain hidden. But as I revisited that moment in my mind, I understood that there had never been a perfect place for what needed to be said. There had only been the choice to say it or not. For years, I had believed that silence was a form of strength, that by stepping back, by not forcing my way into a life that did not welcome me, I was preserving something fragile and important. But silence had not protected anything. It had allowed a story to take root without challenge, to grow unchecked until it replaced the truth entirely. Speaking had not restored what was lost. It had not given me back the years I had missed, the moments that could never be recreated. Emily was no longer the child I remembered, and I was no longer the mother she had once known. What we had now was something uncertain, still forming, shaped by both distance and discovery, but it was real. That was enough. I understood that whatever came next would not be simple. There would be questions, difficult conversations, and moments of hesitation. Trust would not return all at once, and perhaps it never would in the way people imagine. But there was movement now, a direction that had not existed before. As I knelt beside the roses, brushing away a cluster of dry leaves, I felt something settle within me. Not resolution, not completion, but a quiet acceptance of what remained possible. I had lost many years, but I had not lost everything. In the end, life does not always give us the chance to rewrite the past, but it does offer us something quieter and far more powerful, the chance to face the truth. Time has a way of reshaping memories, softening some and sharpening others, yet truth remains the only foundation strong enough to rebuild what has been broken. Sometimes, the hardest step is not forgiveness, but understanding. Not reclaiming what was lost, but accepting what can still be found. There is a quiet strength in choosing honesty over comfort, in speaking when silence feels safer, and in holding on to hope even when it has been tested by years of absence. Because in the end, it is not perfection that heals us, but the willingness to begin again, however uncertain that beginning may be. Thank you for being here and experiencing this story. If it moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to follow and subscribe for more stories like this.